The UN Special Envoy Ibrahim Gambari has arrived in the former Myanmar capital Yangon, hoping to convince the military junta to end its brutal crackdown on demonstrators.
Ahead of his visit, the military has shut down the city, effectively strangling the protests aimed at ending 45 years of military rule. Witnesses say soldiers and police were stationed on most street corners.
Al-Jazeera has a correspondent in Myanmar. For his own safety, we're not naming him. He's just sent us this report from Yangon.
The military in Myanmar seems to put a stranglehold on Yangon at the moment. They're occupying most street corners. Rapid response units are combing the city. Anytime there is a big presence of people protesting, they move in quickly and swiftly. I was actually in the middle of a group when the military moved in. The protesters were chanting. They had banners saying "Free our monks," because something like 2,000 to 3,000 have been arrested in the last few days, and that was the leadership of the protest, and that stopped. The military moved in. They were quite brutal in the way they put it down. They beat people. I saw at least 9 people being arrested. They were forced to squat in the street. Their documentation was checked, and then they were frog marched away, and we don't know what happened there. There's been no serious demonstrations today, I would say, not compared to the last few days. We've had far fewer people on the streets in protest. Perhaps that's got something to do with the hard line of the military in the last couple of days when they've been firing more bullets. More people have been wounded. We still don't know to this point exactly how many civilians have been wounded and killed. The military-backed newspapers are putting out figures saying that 9 have been killed and 11 injured. But paradoxically, they say that 31 members of the security services have been injured. That sounds a bit strange. People here are not holding up much hope about the visit of Mr. Gambari, the UN envoy, because they say these visits have happened before. The outside world knows what's going on in Myanmar, especially now that so much footage and so many images have come out from this city in the last few days, and they are not very optimistic at all. The problem is now, is this the beginning of the end of the protest? Will we see in the next few days more people coming out of the streets, or we will see complete and utter stranglehold of the military? We've heard no word from the generals. They've been putting out propaganda through the newspapers and the state media saying that these are basically terrorist agitators who are rising up against the government, and they're against the good and the stability of the people here in Myanmar. At the moment, we understand that the military is controlling all of the hospitals in the city, so anyone who's killed and injured must go through the military hands. We understand that also a lot of the monks and some of the political activists are being held at the horse race course in the city. It's impossible to get there. We don't know anything more than that. There are rumours, but then these are not corroborated. Diplomatically, there doesn't seem to be much hope. The UN perhaps is the last hope. People here on the ground don't feel that is good enough.
That was our special correspondent in Myanmar. Now, our correspondent Selina Downs is watching developments from across the border in the Thai capital, Bangkok. Selina, if you're still with us, it seems as if Ibrahim Gambari has arrived. What's he hoping to achieve?
Yes, we believe he is on his way to Naypyidaw, the new capital, the new purpose-built capital that the military regime of Myanmar has built. Certainly there are doubts about what it is he's going to be able to achieve. But certainly Burmese activists that we've spoken to here in Thailand, people who've lived under the regime across the border, have told us that they are holding out some hope. They're seeing it as at least a positive step. The only action they're saying in what has largely been a response of words of condemnation coming from the international community, this at least is being seen as some sort of a positive step. We heard the Singaporean foreign minister saying it's a critical mission. It's basically their last chance. It's their best chance they've had in a very long time. Mr. Gambari has made several trips to the region. He was here just last year on 2 visits. He did meet with General Tan Shwe, and he also met with the democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, since then, we haven't seen any noticeable change in the regime. Whether or not this visit is going to be any different, it really is too early to say. His crucial role is going to be trying to bring together all of the groups that we've seen taking part in these massive demonstrations over the past few days. That's bringing together the military regime, the student groups, the Buddhist monks and the opposition parties, members of Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for democracy, bringing them all together to try to engage in dialogue. Whether or not he can achieve that, it is a tall order, but the international community at least is calling for democratic reforms. Whether or not the military regime will deliver that, it's too early to say.
Now it's nighttime right now in Myanmar. We heard from our correspondent inside Myanmar that the major cities, particularly Yangon, are in virtual lockdown. Are you hearing the same?
Yes, our sources that we've spoken to on the ground have basically said it was largely quiet on the streets today. There was a large military presence, however, sealing off key areas around the city, occupying monasteries that have been seen as the hotbeds of these demonstrations, but really locking down the city, tampering with the internet connections, tampering with phone lines, trying to suppress the flow of information getting to the outside world, and possibly trying to project this image of stability and control ahead of Mr. Gambari's visit. What we'll be waiting to see now is whether or not protesters will take to the streets again on Sunday for another day of demonstrations and what the consequences might be if they do take part in demonstrations. There were pockets of demonstrators who did take to the streets today, and we were having reports coming in that there were clashes with security forces. Small bands of protesters, though, just a few hundred, not the tens of thousands that we have seen in the past few days. So whether or not this military lockdown is having some sort of an effect, that seems to be the case.
Selina Downs in Bangkok, thank you very much for that.
There are fears that if the violence continues in Myanmar, thousands could flee across the border into neighbouring Thailand. Al Jazeera's Taimur Nabili is in one town in Thailand where those people could seek refuge.
I'm in the town of Sept on the Thai-Burma border. Behind me, the Friendship Bridge runs over the Mui River into the town of Myawaddy. This is the closest that I can get to Myanmar officially as a journalist, but as a citizen, I and everybody here can just walk across the bridge and enter the country without any trouble at all. I've already done that once. It cost $18, and there appears to be very little heightened security or any real problem with tourists visiting the country. However, it is expected that should the violence in Myanmar become worse, this town of Sept may see some of the backlash. Just in front of me, local television has set up a position anticipating a possible influx of refugees from Myanmar. And in fact, there is already a great deal of cross-border traffic between the two countries and a great number of refugees living in Sept. Also a large number of workers coming across the border on a daily basis. David Hawkins has spoken to a couple of men who have defected from the Myanmar army to come to Sept.
They're not only dissidents, they're defectors. 4 months ago, Nan Hien and Nhan Myo Win deserted from their army unit and escaped to Thailand. I saw the hate in people's eyes when they looked at me, he says. The two former soldiers say about a third of the army is opposed to the regime. But if they don't follow orders and fire on the crowds, they too face imprisonment or worse. I didn't want to join the army, says Nan Hien. I was forced to. Daw Saw Saw, a member of Burma's government in exile, was jailed twice before fleeing to Thailand. She isn't placing any hope in a mutiny among the soldiers.
This time, no difference. They will shoot and shoot on peaceful demonstrators.
Instead, she's appealing to people and governments around the world to help those in Myanmar who are risking their lives for freedom.
We are very much in helpless position. We want all of you, everybody in the universe. We have to have your help. We need your help to stop that government.
That the regime can be ruthless isn't in doubt. These pictures of past victims of repression are evidence enough of that. Now the question is, how many more people will be killed or imprisoned to keep Myanmar's military rulers in power? David Hawkins, Al Jazeera, Sept, Thailand.
A huge bomb has exploded on a military bus in Afghanistan. Around 30 soldiers were killed when the suicide bomber tried to board the bus. The Taliban says it ordered the attack. The bomber says the bomber was wearing an army uniform. From Kabul, Alan Fisher reports.
The The sound of the massive explosion could be heard across Kabul. A bus carrying Afghan military personnel was ripped apart as it carried out a series of early morning pickups. As it stopped in this busy area on the edge of the city centre, a number of people got on board, all apparently in military uniform.